My health was failing, and inside I knew I was dying.
I feel like I had lost so much. I lost my job, I lost my health, I lost my friends. So there wasn't really that much else to lose.
I got to a point where even in daily life, I thought, is this really worth doing? It's the hardest thing that you can do.
Most of the time I was lying in bed, in a fetal position, just trying to hang on.
It was very difficult to function because I was constantly fatigued, I was constantly nauseous, and I had this crazy brain fog.
And I looked at him, I said, okay, well, where's the pill to fix me? He's like, no, you don't understand, there's no pill to fix you.
And there were many times where I would find myself on the floor and having no idea how I got there or how long I had been there.
This is not just something's wrong or something's really wrong. I'm sick, I have to figure out what the problem is.
But I understand how people can take their life. Because you can hit a point where your coping ability is, you just wonder, am I insane? Is this ever gonna end?
So if you think about it, we're looking at 45 million people in the US at a given time being in a moldy building.
Anybody can have problems from a moldy building, a water damaged building. Anybody can have symptoms.
My advice to someone who walks into a building and they start to feel that way is to just turn around and run like hell, because it's poisonous.
The vigilance is just exhausting, it really is. But that is our reality.
Air. It brings us life. With that air comes things like air pollution. It also brings mold spores that have always been present in the air. The same science that brought us air pollution has altered the aggressiveness of these mold spores that occur naturally in the air. They can take root in your home, in your business, and in your food. And when they do, they make toxins that change how you think, how you feel, and even how long you'll live.
When I was a kid, I was sick a lot, and then as a young man, I weighed 300 pounds. And it felt like every day was a struggle, like I was always using maximum effort to get anything done. The reason I felt this way is that I was exposed to toxic mold. This is a problem that affects hundreds of millions of people every single day. I'm Dave Asprey, and I'm making this documentary because mold affects everyone.
The common symptoms are brain fog, cognitive dysfunction, mood issues, sleep issues, autoimmune, inflammatory problems, joint pain, fatigue.
I've always loved to be very physically active. Prior to being exposed to mold, I loved to surf, loved to swim, loved to rock climb, weight train. I was an Olympic lifting trainer, I was a CrossFit trainer, a Navy officer. So physical capacity and physical exercise and exertion have always been something that's very important to me. One of the biggest challenges has been having very little energy, very little capacity, both cognitively as well as physically.
I had uncontrollable throw up every day, migraines, severe hypertension, cardiac arrhythmias, unusual periods, lots of abdominal pain, joint pain, fatigue.
The most important issue is that mold and all of the other critters that live inside wet buildings will do is to create a collection of symptoms. It won't be one. It might be one that's noticed, but over time, gradually, days pass, weeks pass, the symptoms grow up until a mean number of symptoms, an average symptom burden of about 20.
Once the mold is growing at some place in your house, it's going to release these mycotoxins. The toxins are poisons. They are chemicals. You can't kill them. Right? They are what are causing the problem in mold illness. And they float around your house, and they can deposit themselves on your furniture, on your books, on your possessions, on your clothing. Some people will move, or they'll remediate their house, but they don't take care of the possessions. And so the mold is still there, and it's still floating around, and the toxin from the mold poisons the people.
I was so fatigued that I would force myself to walk out to Central Park, sit on a rock for about 30 minutes. I would try to read if I could. I couldn't even pay attention to the words too well. And then I would go back to my apartment and sleep, and I would sleep for another 22 hours. That's about all I could do at that time.
It was my daughter's birthday. I was taking her to get clothes at Sears, and I collapsed on the floor. By the time the paramedics got there, I did not have a pulse. I was very scared because my daughter was there and I was literally dying.
The molds are part of the total environmental load. And if you picture yourself as a barrel, molds, pesticides, solvents, bacteria, viruses all fill that barrel. And then the mold gets excess from your house or your office or your work. It may spill over, and then you start getting symptoms, screw up your immune system and your enzyme detoxification systems, and then cause illness or dysfunction.
Too many people have this little lie in their head. I can't remember anything, but I'm 40, that's normal. It's like, no, something's the matter, you have bad habits. I can't remember anything, I'm 50, well, that's because I'm 50. That's normal. No, that's because you've been exposed to something or you have bad habits. Or, well, I'm 70, and, well, 70-year-old people have memory problems and brain fog. And I'm like, no, they don't, unless they've been exposed to something or they have bad habits. So it's never normal to have brain symptoms. That's not normal. It's the sign of trouble.
Lack of focus and concentration can cause you to lose words when you're talking, can reduce short-term memory in time, can cause reduction in long-term memory. It can cause you to become disoriented, where you forget your own name for a few seconds, or you can be driving around in your neighborhood and kind of look like, where am I, for a few seconds, till you track. Yeah, it can be devastating. And we have patients that have lost their jobs because their cognitive abilities had declined so much that they were unable to perform their duties.
Unfortunately, exposure to mold and water damage conditions has been widely documented to cause significant neurocognitive effects. One of the most disturbing ones was a study in Poland of young children in water damaged buildings that showed significant IQ drops.
It's totally possible to be exposed to mold, to take your IQ from 130 to 115, so you're still normal, you're actually still pretty good normal, but you hate how you feel, because you can tell that there's a big change and a big difference.
When I first started getting sick, it started with just kind of isolated, like, panic, anxiety attacks. And they would get better, and I would just kind of shrug them off, and then it became an everyday thing. And then the fatigue started setting in and all kinds of other symptoms, tingling in the arms and shooting pains.
The most difficult thing for me was that my brain was not working. As time went on, it worked less and less, until at the end I was really comatose most of the time and in bed almost all of the time, just trying to hang on, which is why I was so desperate to try different things, because mold seemed like it had the possibility of being an issue when I read about what Stachybotrys could do, but no one else believed that it could be the case. So I think I had to get to a level of desperation before I could even consider the possibility of it.
It was early in the 1970s, perhaps 1969, that fungicides were added to paints for the first time. Unfortunately, those fungicides created mutations in fungi such that the fungi that lived beyond the fungicide created toxins that made us sick and the ones that were for non-mutants did not make us sick. We put the fungicide into the paint, we're paying the price.
So there are molds in your environment and there are molds in food. And people who are sensitive to mold in their environment are often more sensitive to the mold or yeast in their food.
Mold, certain of them, make a poisonous byproduct called a mycotoxin. So it's a mold poison. For example, penicillium is a mold. The poison it makes is called penicillin. Brewer's yeast is the mold. The poison it makes is called alcohol. And of course, we all know alcohol is neurotoxic. Few people know, although this was published in the year 2002, I believe, in the Journal of the American Medical Association, Dr. Ruth Etzel published this, that our corn supply in America is commonly contaminated with these fungal metabolites, that peanuts in America are commonly contaminated with these fungal byproducts. Even today, we're learning more and more about our coffee supply in America being contaminated with these fungal products. These are not okay to eat in large doses. So if you love that cup of coffee and you drink a moldy coffee every day, it may have an adverse effect on your health. The problem is you run from doctor to doctor to doctor trying to get an answer as to why the brain isn't working, the heart is pounding so fiercely, the skin is breaking out. And no doctor today is going to equate a moldy coffee, a moldy bowl of popcorn, or peanuts that you get at a restaurant to that symptom pattern, and yet scientific literature is really picking this up now.
Foods that we know are higher in mycotoxins are grains, nuts, coffee, chocolate, wine. A lot of times people who have been exposed find that they can't tolerate those foods anymore.
I was sweating and nauseous. The nausea, obviously I couldn't eat. My bowel movements were all changed, and because of that, I lost approximately 20 pounds. People were looking at me, and it was obvious I was very, very sick.
I did not know what was making me so sick. Within a matter of 2 to 3 weeks, I went from size 2 to size 14, and then pretty soon I was size 18.
Weight gain is incredibly common. We ask about it routinely. There are a few people that paradoxically lose weight, but it usually is weight gain out of the blue, without any change of diet, 20, 30 pounds, and that weight won't come off by doing the normal things of exercising and eating less.
Psychological symptoms, they abound. Minimal would be just mood swings. People don't feel well, they're cranky, they don't sleep well, they tend to get set off very easily.
I just lost interest in everything. Just the ensuing depression and anxiety just like took over everything. You know, I couldn't concentrate at all. I would stare at my guitar for months and just not even touch it. I just kind of withdrew.
Changes we look for, we call them mood swings. Some people will get down and would they have suicidal thoughts. Other people get agitated beyond agitated.
So one of the areas that's also damaged with mold is an area called the amygdala. So the amygdala is in, underneath your temples and behind your eyes. Little almond-shaped structure that when that is damaged, people can have rage for no reason. And it can devastate their relationships, it can devastate their work, and people will judge them as bad when they're really not bad, they're sick.
I would have this sway and moodiness. My girlfriend would see me happy at one moment and then immediately just angry or frustrated for no reason. Even at home, I would be sitting on the couch and I would just feel a wave of anger or some other emotion come over me. I felt like, from an emotional standpoint, my life was completely out of control and I had absolutely no idea why.
So people who have moldy brains hate themselves because they don't know why they're acting that way, and they don't understand it's medical, and so they assume it's moral, that they're choosing to act this way, and they hate themselves. I mean, the loathing. And their families hate them too, because it's like, if you loved me, you wouldn't be an asshole. It's like, why are you an asshole? And nobody knows. And the imaging has taught me that behavior's a lot more complicated, and it makes me more thoughtful, more forgiving, and when I see people act badly, I'm like, somebody should look at their brain.
100 years ago, coal miners would take a canary into the mine with them. Not for the songs, but because when the toxic gases in the mine got strong enough to kill the canary, they knew they had only minutes to get out, even though they couldn't detect it. It turns out that about 28% of people are genetically canaries for toxic mold.
We did draw some laboratory markers, and those came back that we had some genotypes that were considered dreaded, and that our kids now had as well.
We have 3 children, and Alex, our oldest, had comprehension issues, lost his love of playing piano, was affected in many, many ways. He wound up with some pretty severe neuropsychiatric issues, and I'm happy to say he's doing much better. Removal from mold is an amazing thing. Drew, our second son, he was supposed to be getting up for school one day, and he called, Mom, something's wrong, and he was diaphoretic and hunched over, and then within about 2 or 3 days, he really couldn't walk. His legs would not support him. We eventually got a wheelchair because it did not look like we were going forward, and he was in the wheelchair for 11 weeks. We started him back on his mold detox, and sure enough, within days of being on the mold detox, he was able to stand on his legs again. So we thought, this is the pathway we need to be going. No child should have to go through that. Our oldest has had a severe crisis. Drew has had a severe crisis. And I hold my breath as a mom. I know that Olivia's numbers are very high, and that concerns me.
The percentage of people that have positive biomarkers varies based on the biomarker. If we were to look at the genetic predisposition, about 25 to 28% of the entire population of North America have the genetic predisposition to have problems with water-damaged buildings. That's a pretty huge amount. That's 75 million people in the United States.
The vigilance is just exhausting. It really is. But that is our reality.
The modern world, with all its high-tech advancements, has accelerated the growth of airborne particles. Every day, the air we breathe is filled with them, both natural and man-made. These include everything from combustion engines and smokestacks to mold and mold toxins. Breathing these airborne particles can make some of us weak and some of us really sick.
Somewhere around 50% of the buildings in the United States have water damage. What we know is that anybody can have problems from a moldy building, a water-damaged building. Anybody can have symptoms. But somewhere between 25 and 28% of the people in the United States can go on to develop multi-symptom illness that can be debilitating.
They did some work on my previous apartment. They came in and jackhammered the floor out. There was apparently some problems with the pipes, which were about 6 feet below. The debris was piled up higher than the refrigerator, just concrete. And of course, all the particulate matter went everywhere, and everything I own had dust on it. So it was shortly thereafter that I started feeling really sick.
I'd had a door installed, and the installer failed to put any sort of moisture barrier. So whenever there was moisture outside, it wicked under the floor about 12 feet. Then I started smelling what I know is Stachybotrys. It's the mold that grows in drywall. And there was just a little tiny strip on the molding. And I pulled that off and got it outside, and I actually did send that in and had it tested, and it was Stachybotrys.
I lived in a room that was above a sauna and a shower. And the exhaust for that sauna and shower, instead of, by code, routing those to the outside, they had routed those exhaust ducts and just dumped them into the wall. So that created a perfect environment for mold to grow. And they did some construction. They ended up ripping open that wall. And sure enough, there was a huge sheet of black mold in there. In a certain sense, it was validating to the degree that, like, okay, this makes sense.
There was one leak that their pipe burst inside the wall. My bedroom wall was shared with that person's laundry wall. So when they tested my house, it showed it was the whole building that was infected.
And a lot of times people don't even know that they have plumbing leaks, especially if it's a little pinhead leak. It could be going on for a very long time, and they wouldn't necessarily know until either all of a sudden the floor caves in or the ceiling falls in or somebody's feeling sick and they're trying to figure out why.
The mold was concentrated in my bedroom, above my bed, within the ceiling, so it was undetectable. My daughter Victoria had similar reactions from the mold as I had given her a bed, unknowing that it had been in my room for 5 years. And after she got the bed, she started getting the same type of cognitive difficulties, both of her legs, knees. She was having problems and seeing knee specialists. At that time, sorry, just knowing that my children were watching me fail as my health was failing, and inside I knew I was dying. But it's Victoria getting the same symptoms that led me to believe it was something more than just my health. It was something that was within the home.
The problem with modern buildings is that they're really made out of paper. They're made out of drywall, which basically works like paper. When it gets wet, it gets soggy, and it provides wonderful mold food. We also have HVAC systems where we collect the dust in the HVAC systems, and with moisture in there, that provides a pretty good environment for mold to grow, just even if you don't have a leak in your house. We didn't have this kind of building before 1970. So a lot of the reason that this has emerged in the past 40 years is because we built buildings in ways that no one in civilization has ever done.
I moved into an apartment on 5th Avenue, Central Park views, everything that I ever wanted, a LEED certified building. So I thought for sure, from an environmental perspective and from an air perspective, everything should be perfect. I started to recognize that when I walked from the elevator to my apartment door, just that short walk, I started wheezing a little bit. I didn't feel very well. I wound up doing what's called an ERMI test, and that test in the apartment was a 4, and the test in the hallway was a 13. The problem here is they didn't condition the air before they put it into the building. So if it was 90 degrees out here and 90% humidity, within minutes my hallway would be 90 degrees and 90% humidity, to the point where I could take my finger along the wall and actually have water on it. It had turned into a giant mold greenhouse.
One of the real problems with mold is that it's very hard for us to control. So if we can build the safest house in the world, we can make sure that it doesn't have any lead paint in it, we can make sure it doesn't have any asbestos in it, we can go out of our way not to use any harmful chemicals in our home. But mold hides.
I think one of the most amazing things was that there was very little mold. We had 2 areas that had mold in them. One was a leak under the bathtub and one was the French doors upstairs, and that had not been flashed properly. We didn't have a big black fuzzy wall. We had mold behind a wall that nobody ever saw, and it got in the air ducts.
It started during Hurricane Sandy. I live on a sandbar, obviously, this is Coney Island, and the water came from the ocean side and the bay behind us. It ran down my street over here. I have a bulkhead behind me. It wrapped around the bulkhead. I was downstairs in the basement with a friend of mine, and we were taping the windows, and the water just piled up. The doors popped in, and I said, it's time to leave. There's nothing going to save anything in this basement. Some mushrooms grew out of the wall, but at the time I did not think anything of mold. I didn't know it was affecting me.
Dead mold is just as bad as live mold. When mold dies, its cell wall desiccates, it gets dry, and it'll break apart into little fragments. And the fragments have toxins on them. This is a disease of toxin. When you inhale those toxins, they're in you. If you don't recognize them as being foreign, you have a difficult time getting them out of your body.
Here's a house that was overrun by mold after Hurricane Sandy. It's an extraordinary example of how toxic mold can grow in your home. Here's how mold contaminates a building and makes you sick. First, there are wet or damp conditions in your home, school, or office that come from things like water leaks, poor construction, constricted airflow, air conditioning, and condensation. The mold grows sometimes in the open, but more often you can't see it. Spores from the mold and their toxins are released into the air. When there's mold in your environment, it contaminates your furniture, your clothes, and everything you own. You and your family are exposed to the toxins. You get systemic body poisoning from mold toxins. After you're sick, mold can directly invade and infect your already weakened body, which makes you feel not very good, so you stay home, which makes you sicker and sicker, because that's where the mold is. What you can't see can hurt you.
We just came out of this house. There's black mold in the ceiling. There's water damage all over the place. What happened here?
We did some air testing. We found mold spore counts were in the thousands for Aspergillus, Penicillium, also Stachybotrys. So as you walk through the house, before we tear everything out, you can see water stains in about 12 or 13 places throughout the house, on the upper floors. In the basement, there's a 3-foot water line.
I noticed in the kitchen, I pulled down some of that drywall, and there was no marks at all on the paint. And you peel back the paint, and there's layers of cardboard just full of black mold.
Most times, the moisture originates from behind the wall. So when you're looking at a wall and it looks okay on one side of the wall, we know that when we pull the drywall out, the back of the wall is going to be 10 times worse than the front of the drywall. The first thing that we do when we come into a house is a pre-treatment. So we'll fog the house once to kill the majority of the mold, surface mold, so that it protects the guys. The next thing we do is we're going to take out all the carpets. We'll take the carpets out first because the carpets are the most porous materials in the house that are going to hold the most non-visible mold. So once the carpets are out, we have a better slate to work on. Then we're going to tear out all the drywall. We're going to go room by room. Once all of the drywall is out, all of the insulation is out, then we'll determine whether or not subfloors have to come out. In this particular case, you saw us ripping up the hardwood floors. After everything's out, all the nails are pulled, all the screws are pulled, all the insulation is gone. Any porous material that could fail an air test has got to be removed. And then after that's done, then we start the fogging. Mold is a living organism. As soon as the fog hits the mold, it foams up. So we know to scrub that area, fog it again, scrub it, fog it again.
The exciting thing is when we see the damage, they're not stuck with that. And we can tell how much recovery is possible scanning them 3 months, 4 months, even 6 months later.
Our treatment protocol depends on how poisoned or how sensitive the patient is. So first, history, physical exam, laboratory test to find out what their immune system looks like, then provocation of the molds, and then treatment with the injections of the mold. Also, if they have mycotoxins or mold toxins in them, we would then go ahead and give them sauna if they can tolerate it. And we would give them high nutrients like vitamin C, glutathione, multiminerals, multivitamins.
The sky may have fallen, but we have to move on. You have to take your situation for what it is now and do everything in your power to help yourself and your family.
The question is, do we want to know? And it's scary. I don't think I wanted to know either.